Alright, I want to give you my personal breakdown of the real reason that Elon is trying to buy Twitter. Quick, think of a playing card, but only in your mind. 3, 2, you thought of the ace of spades. That's because statistically, most people pick the ace of spades, and as a kid, I used to think that magicians could control people's minds. But as an adult, I figured out the real truth.
He could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
Yeah.
It's not okay for Elon to control people's minds. That's our job. First and foremost, I want to thank Ben Shapiro for making a pretty incredible video about this, and I want to echo a lot of his points because he brings up some really good ones, as he usually does. It's kind of annoying. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you might have noticed that Elon Musk is trying to buy Twitter. Over 2.8 million people voted on his tweet to take Twitter public at $54.20 a share. That translates to a $43 billion market cap. Now, as of right now, Twitter's current market cap is somewhere around $37 billion, which means technically he is offering a $6 billion premium over the sticker price. But that's not the most interesting part. Check this out. Twitter has roughly 768 million shares outstanding. That's the total amount of stocks available. And if you take that number and multiply it by $4.20, you get $3.2 billion. And you know you're rich when you can throw in a couple extra billion just to make a joke about 420. Now, an overwhelming amount of people, 83.5%, voted yes to taking Twitter private. And that's extremely important, not only because of what it means for shareholders of Twitter, but also what it means for people that hold crypto like Bitcoin and, I never thought I'd say this, especially Dogecoin. But most importantly, what it means for free speech. This is a very interesting story, and there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So in today's video, I want to give you a breakdown of how this will affect you, why he's actually doing it, and some of the pros and cons if he were to succeed. I'm excited, let's get right into it. Hi, my name is Andrei Jikh, hope you're doing well, come for the finance, and stay for the Twitter. I forget what comedian said this, but Twitter really is like the bathroom stall of the internet. It doesn't have the nicest messages, but since we have to use the bathroom from time to time, it's kind of unavoidable reading them. Now, here's the thing about public companies like Twitter. They have what are called a board of directors. The board of directors of a public company are elected by shareholders. One stock equals one vote. And these guys get to make really important key decisions like dividends, how much to pay their executives, mergers, and of course, the sale of the company. They also have what are called fiduciary responsibilities, and that means all of their decisions have to be based in the best financial interest of its stockholders. They have to consider any and every single option presented to them as long as it makes financial sense to do so. And that's where the story begins, because ever since the beginning of this year, since January, Elon has been buying Twitter. So far, he's accumulated 9.1% of the entire company, becoming its largest shareholder, temporarily until Vanguard bought a bunch more stocks and it became the #1. But usually, not always, but sometimes when you become a significant shareholder of a company, its board will invite you to take a seat on its board of directors. And that's exactly the role that Twitter offered Elon. But there was a catch. The catch was that if Elon was going to join the board of directors, he would not be able to own more than 14.9% of the company. Since his goal is to own 100%, for reasons I will explain in just a few minutes, he understandably backed out and told them that he was not interested. The board then responded with something called a limited duration shareholder rights plan. And here's exactly what that means. A shareholder's rights plan is also known as the poison pill, which sounds really sinister, but that's because historically it was. It was something soldiers carried with them into battle in case if they ever got captured, they could just take it and then poof, David Copperfield, where they could disappear and never reappear. Now, in the world of investing, a shareholder's rights plan is just a tactic to prevent what's called a hostile takeover. And this is where it would allow shareholders to buy their company at a discount if some event were to happen. Now, in Twitter's case, they voted that going forward, if anyone tries to buy more than 15% of their company without the board's approval, it would trigger the ability to allow other shareholders to buy the company's stock at a cheaper price. This would last until April 14th, 2023. The only person who this does not apply to is the person who triggered this shareholder rights plan, which in this case is the buyer, or in this case, Elon Musk. And here's exactly what that that means. Essentially, the members of the board will flood the market with new shares, and when they do, it will decrease the overall percentage of ownership from the person doing the buying. And the idea is that if you allow current shareholders the opportunity to invest in the same company they've already invested in, but at a lower price, hopefully they'll buy more shares, which would hopefully also discourage the buyer from paying a premium for theirs. And that's what makes it very difficult and very expensive for the buyer to own 100% of the company. The other advantage of this plan is that it opens up room for negotiations, because if another buyer comes along, they might want to pay a premium and just a little bit more to buy up the company. Now, if you invest in a company like Twitter and this actually happens to you, then there are some disadvantages that you need to know about, and here's what they are. One disadvantage is that new shares will have to be created, and if you don't buy those new shares, the value of what you own gets what's called diluted. For example, let's say there was a fictional company called Corp, and it was worth $100 in total. There are 10 shares outstanding, and you bought one of those shares. That means you invested $10. Let's say there was a hostile takeover by a fictional character named Pegasus, and now you had to double the amount of shares outstanding from 10 to 20. Well, just because you doubled the amount of shares in the company doesn't mean you doubled the value of the company. It's still a $100 company, and that means the value of each stock just got cut in half, from $10 down to $5. Now, you could exercise your right to buy those new shares at $5 to lower your cost basis, which is just fancy for the average price you got in at, but if you don't, then the value of what you currently have just went down, and that means it sort of in a way forces investors to buy more shares just to break even. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to Twitter. This is just an extreme example with a bunch of fictional characters from Yu-Gi-Oh, so obviously that's not going to happen, but I just wanted to show you how that would work, and also because I love Yu-Gi-Oh. Also, don't confuse these with a stock split like the 10-to-1 Shopify just recently announced. Those are good by comparison. In the same example of the Corp, instead of 10 shares outstanding, we'd now have 100 shares outstanding. So every shareholder of one stock would now own 10 instead of 1. But the same principle of value applies. We're not creating more value, we're just shuffling around some numbers. So now each of my shares would be worth $1 to add up to 10. So if Twitter is the poison pill that hurts investors, then the stock split is the placebo pill, which, like my ex-girlfriend, looks good, does nothing, because even though I have more shares, they still add up to what they were worth before, and that's just an easy way to remember all that. Another downside to the poison pill defense is that it makes it harder for another investor to come along and buy the company because they don't want to deal with the hassle. That's why Elon is upset, and that's why he wants to get his lawyers involved, because his argument is that the board of directors are not exercising their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders because they're making it harder for them to actually make some money, and that's the people they're supposed to work for. The counter argument from the board, though, is that the reason they're doing this is to open up negotiations and sweeten the deal for their investors in the future. The counter argument to that is that if you add up the top 10 holdings of the members of the board, they add up to less than 0.012%. And Elon's argument is that those people should not be making a decision for the rest of the 99.9% of shareholders. And that's what's going on. Now that you're all caught up, let me explain the real reason Elon is buying Twitter. The real reason that Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter is because he wants to make more money. No, I'm kidding. There are far better investments out there than Twitter, and Elon is fully aware of that. Twitter is not profitable, and you can check this out for yourself of any company by looking at its PE, or what's called the price to earnings ratio. And as you can see right here, Twitter's PE ratio is just a dash. It's a zero, it's non-existent because they're not making any money and they've been struggling for years to find a way to do that. So Elon is not buying Twitter for the sake of money. Instead, he's buying it because he wants to take the company private. When a company goes private, there are no more stocks, there are no more shareholders or members of the board to slow down the decision-making process. Whatever one man says goes, and that becomes a very effective strategy to implement change. And the reason he wants to change Twitter is because he believes Twitter is a good platform to exercise free speech. He is what he calls himself a free speech absolutist. And that means his core belief is that we should allow all tweets to fully exist at all times. Either everyone can say anything or it's not free speech. Now, if you've been following this story, you'll know that it's somewhat divisive, with some people rooting for Elon to buy Twitter and some people not so much. So here are some of the reasons and arguments for and against Elon buying Twitter. The argument for allowing Elon to buy Twitter and take it private is because there's very little reason to doubt his intentions about freedom of speech. His point of view is that we should be very careful about deleting tweets or banning people off the platform permanently, and that we should allow for more transparency and we should stop the spreading of misinformation. And that's where Ben Shapiro's video brings up a lot of great points. He says that if we suppress information, that leads to conspiracism. And this makes sense because if people see that certain tweets are deleted, if only certain pieces of information are shown to people, and that people are permanently banned off the platform, they may say, look, I know you're doing something. I don't know why you're doing it, but I have my own reasons to explain exactly what your real intentions are. That creates suspicion, which leads to conspiracism, which is never a good thing. Another reason to allow Elon to buy Twitter is because he's offering more money than what the company is worth. As of right now, it's worth anywhere between $43 to $47 a share, and he's offering $54.20 a share, which represents a 20% premium over its current average price, which for stocks is huge. Another reason to allow him to do that is because the board barely owns 0.01% of the company, and the argument is that their interests are not as financially aligned to their shareholders as people think. And the last one, if we want to speculate, is that it would be a great thing for crypto, especially for holders of Bitcoin and Dogecoin, and he would probably integrate some kind of a payment system or a tipping system with Bitcoin or Dogecoin underpinned as the currency, because Dogecoin really is the currency of the people. Much wow. So money. With that said though, here are some of the arguments against allowing Elon to buy Twitter. One argument against taking Twitter private is that you are giving up the control to just one person. And even though that one person is someone a lot of people respect and admire, it's still a bigger risk because it's being exclusively given to one person, and that's a lot more of a risk than a company that is public, with hopefully some checks and balances with shareholders and members of the board. Another argument is that it could potentially jeopardize other investors from other companies of his like Tesla, because Elon has been known to get in trouble with the SEC by saying things the SEC doesn't like. So by giving him an entire platform, it could get him into more hot water. And some people say that it's kind of pointless who owns Twitter, because even if he were to own 100% of it, that would still not give him the right to have absolute free speech, because the SEC would still have jurisdiction over what he says, so he still has to be very careful. Other people have pointed out that in 2016, Elon canceled the pre-order of a customer's Tesla because they were critical of his company in a blog post they put out online. And while it's in every right for Elon to refuse service to anyone he wishes, some people argue that that's no different to how Twitter operates today, and that it doesn't exactly inspire confidence if he were to be given 100% control of the company, that he wouldn't use the platform to silence his critics like he's sort of done in the past. And that's a valid concern, and I think it's important to understand and hear all sides of the spectrum, which is exactly what this conversation is about. Personally, I wish Twitter didn't exist sometimes, because I don't think it's the kindest of places, and I try to reserve my opinion about other people, especially those I've never met before, but I really do believe that Elon wants to protect free speech, and I think it'd be kind of cool if he were to take Twitter private. I think he could do some pretty cool things with it, especially if he integrated crypto. But as far as free speech is concerned, whether or not it is integrated into the future of Twitter in the way that we all want it to be, is something we just have to wait and see. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Go grab up to $250 worth of free Bitcoin right here. Go grab your free stocks, links down below, and then go track them automatically with the spreadsheet link down below in my Patreon. Love you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you back here on Monday and Friday, sometimes Wednesday. Bye-bye.